Commander Zethkar of the Valorian Imperial Fleet had witnessed terror in its purest forms across 17 different star systems. He had seen entire worlds consumed by the ravenous hive swarms, watched as ancient civilizations crumbled beneath the relentless advance of chittering nightmares that devoured everything in their path. Yet nothing had prepared him for what he would discover about fear itself when he first encountered the species known as humans. The emergency council meeting aboard the flagship Eternal Vigilance buzzed with the nervous energy of desperate military leaders. Representatives from 12 allied species filled the crystalline chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The holographic display at the center showed a three-dimensional map of the Kepler sector, where red markers indicated hive incursions spreading like a plague across inhabited worlds. "The situation grows worse by the cycle," announced High Admiral Varix, her scaled hands clasping behind her back as she addressed the assembly. "The hive has consumed 4 more worlds in the past solar week. Rendala Prime, with its population of 2 billion Qualari, fell in less than 6 rotations. The defense fleet managed to evacuate perhaps 3% of the civilian population before the planetary shields collapsed." Murmurs of distress rippled through the chamber. Zethkar felt his own stomach clench at the implications. The hive's appetite was insatiable, and their reproductive rate meant that every consumed world only made them stronger. Traditional warfare had proven almost useless against them. Their biological ships could repair damage in real time, their warrior forms adapted to whatever weapons were used against them, and their sheer numbers made conventional tactics meaningless. "We have received intelligence that suggests the hive is preparing for a massive coordinated assault on the core worlds," continued Admiral Varix. "Our analysts believe they intend to strike at Nexus Station itself within the next rotation cycle. If Nexus falls, the entire Alliance network will collapse." The chamber fell silent. Nexus Station served as the central hub for all interstellar communications and trade routes. Its destruction would fragment the Alliance into isolated pockets, making them easy prey for the hive's endless hunger. "There is, however, a potential avenue for assistance that has recently presented itself," Admiral Varix said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. 3 cycles ago, we received first contact protocols from a previously unknown species calling themselves humans. They claim to inhabit a system designated as Sol, located in what we have classified as Sector 7 Alpha. Zethkar frowned, accessing his mental database of known species. Sector 7 Alpha was considered a galactic backwater, containing mostly primitive civilizations that had barely achieved faster-than-light communication, let alone travel. What could such a young species possibly offer against the hive? "These humans," continued the Admiral, "have made remarkable claims about their military capabilities. They assert that they have successfully repelled hive incursions in their local space and request permission to join our defensive coalition. Frankly, their claims seem improbable." Ambassador Thylex of the Centauri Confederation rose from his position, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. "With respect, Admiral, are we so desperate that we now consider aid from prestellar primitives? What could a species that has likely just discovered plasma weaponry contribute to our struggle?" "That was precisely my initial assessment," Admiral Varix replied. "However, our scouts have confirmed the existence of several destroyed hive bioships in the Sol system's outer reaches. The damage patterns are unique, unlike anything we have observed in our databases." She gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show debris field analysis. Zethkar studied the images with growing interest. The hive ships appeared to have been destroyed not by energy weapons or conventional explosives, but by some form of kinetic bombardment that had literally shattered their biological hulls into fragments. "The humans have agreed to send a small diplomatic and military contingent to demonstrate their capabilities," Admiral Varix announced. "They should arrive within the next few rotations. Commander Zethkar, you will be responsible for liaising with this human delegation and assessing their potential contribution to our defense efforts." Zethkar stood and saluted crisply. "Understood, Admiral. What should I expect regarding their physical characteristics and cultural protocols?" "They are carbon-based bipeds, similar in structure to several known species. Preliminary scans suggest they are remarkably adaptable to various environmental conditions. As for cultural protocols," Admiral Varix paused, consulting her data pad. They seem surprisingly straightforward in their communications. No complex ritual requirements or extended negotiation periods. They simply requested permission to help and asked where they should send their ships. This struck Zethkar as odd. Most species required extensive diplomatic preliminaries before committing to military alliance, especially against a threat as dangerous as the Hive. The fact that these humans were apparently willing to dive headfirst into a war that wasn't originally theirs suggested either remarkable altruism or concerning recklessness. 2 rotations later, Zethkar stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching the approach of the human fleet through the massive transparent aluminum windows. He had expected perhaps a single ship, maybe 2 if the humans were particularly optimistic about their capabilities. Instead, his sensors showed 12 vessels approaching in tight formation. The ships themselves were unlike anything in his experience. Where most species favored organic curves or crystalline geometries, human vessels appeared to be constructed from angular, utilitarian designs that prioritized function over aesthetics. They moved with a precision that spoke of advanced maneuvering systems, maintaining perfect formation despite the complex gravitational fields around Nexus Station. Nexus Control, this is Admiral Sarah Chen aboard the UES Indomitable, came a crisp voice over the communication channels, requesting permission to dock and transfer diplomatic personnel. Zethkar activated his communicator. Admiral Chen, this is Commander Zethkar of the Valorian Fleet. Permission granted for docking Bay 7. Welcome to Nexus Station. Copy that, Commander. Appreciate the hospitality. We'll have our people ready for immediate briefing if that works for your schedule. Again, Zethkar noted the directness of their communication style. No flowery diplomatic language or formal protocols. They simply stated their intentions and requested information about next steps. An hour later, Zethkar found himself in Conference Room Alpha, studying the small group of humans who had just boarded the station. Admiral Chen was a middle-aged female with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. Beside her stood Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, a heavily built male whose scarred face suggested extensive combat experience, and Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a younger female who appeared to be their technical specialist. Commander Zethkar, Admiral Chen said, extending her hand in what his cultural database identified as a greeting gesture. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I understand you've been having some trouble with the Hive. Zethkar grasped her hand briefly, noting the surprising strength in her grip. Admiral Chen, welcome aboard Nexus Station. I must admit, we are curious about how a species from such a distant system came to encounter the Hive. They showed up in our neighborhood about 6 months ago, Colonel Rodriguez replied with a casual shrug. Started sniffing around our outer colonies, probing our defenses. We took exception to uninvited guests. Dr. Warren activated a holographic projector, displaying tactical data that made Zethkar's eyes widen. We've been monitoring Hive expansion patterns for the past several years through our deep space sensor networks. When they entered Sol space, we were ready for them. You've been monitoring them for years, Zethkar asked incredulously. How did you even know they existed before they reached your territory? Admiral Chen smiled grimly. Commander, humans have a very simple philosophy when it comes to threats. We don't wait for them to knock on our door, we find them first. The holographic display shifted to show a comprehensive map of known Hive movements across multiple sectors. The level of detail was staggering, showing not just current positions, but predicted expansion routes and resource consumption patterns. This was intelligence that the Alliance had been struggling to compile for decades. How did you gather this information? Zethkar demanded. Our own intelligence networks have been trying to map Hive movements for cycles, and you're showing me data that surpasses anything we've collected. Colonel Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Let's just say humans are very good at going places we're not supposed to be and watching things that don't want to be watched. Dr. Warren expanded a section of the display showing detailed analysis of Hive biological systems. We've also developed some interesting theories about their reproductive cycles and resource requirements. Based on our observations, we believe the current expansion into core world territory is actually a sign of desperation rather than strength. Desperation, Zethkar repeated. They've consumed dozens of worlds. Their fleets grow stronger with every conquest. True, Dr. Warren agreed, But look at the consumption patterns. They're burning through resources faster than they can replenish them. Each world they consume yields diminishing returns because they're stripping away the infrastructure that made those worlds valuable in the first place. They're essentially eating themselves toward starvation. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the bustling traffic around Nexus Station. The problem is, a starving predator is often more dangerous than a well-fed one. They're going to make increasingly desperate moves, which means they'll accept higher casualties to achieve their objectives. Which brings us to why we're here, Colonel Rodriguez added. You've been fighting the Hive using conventional military tactics, forming defensive lines, protecting fixed positions, trying to match their numbers with your own. That's exactly the wrong approach. Zethkar felt a flash of irritation. These humans had been dealing with the Hive for mere months, while the Alliance had been fighting them for years. And what would you suggest instead? Admiral Chen turned back to face him, her expression serious. Commander, what's the one thing every military manual tells you never to do when facing a superior enemy? Fight them on their terms, Zethkar replied automatically. Exactly. The Hive wants a grinding war of attrition where they can use their numbers and adaptability to wear you down. Instead, we need to make them fight our kind of war. Which is? Colonel Rodriguez grinned, and for the first time, Zethkar felt a small chill run down his spine. There was something unsettling about that expression, something that spoke of violence held barely in check. Fast, brutal, and absolutely merciless, the colonel replied. We don't give them time to adapt. We don't give them time to reproduce. We hit them so hard and so fast that they never recover from the first blow. Dr. Warren activated another section of the holographic display, showing tactical simulations that made Zethkar's breath catch. The scenarios depicted strike forces moving at velocities he had previously thought impossible, delivering coordinated attacks that seemed to materialize from empty space and vanish just as quickly. This is theoretical, of course, Zethkar said, trying to maintain his composure. These engagement parameters exceed the capabilities of any known drive systems. Do they? Admiral Chen asked mildly. Colonel, would you mind showing the commander our arrival footage? The display shifted to show sensor recordings from the human fleet's approach to Nexus Station. Zethkar studied the data carefully, then felt his blood turn cold. The readings showed that the human ships had approached at speeds that should have been physically impossible for vessels of their size and mass. More disturbing, they had somehow managed to mask their approach until they were well within the station's defensive perimeter. How, he whispered. Humans have always been very good at making tools, Dr. Warren replied simply. When we learned about the Hive, we realized our existing tools weren't adequate, so we made better ones. Admiral Chen returned to her seat, her expression becoming more serious. Commander, I want to be completely honest with you. What we're proposing isn't going to be a clean, honorable battle between military forces. The Hive doesn't fight that way, and neither can we if we want to win. What exactly are you proposing? Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward, his scarred face grim. We're going to teach them to be afraid. We're going to hunt them through every system they occupy. We're going to make them understand that every world they take from us will cost them more than they can afford to lose. And how do you plan to accomplish this? By showing them something they've never seen before, Admiral Chen replied. A species that doesn't just fight to survive, but fights to win. A species that will follow them to the ends of the galaxy if necessary to make sure they never threaten anyone again. Zethkar stared at the three humans across from him, suddenly understanding why their casual confidence had been making him uncomfortable. It wasn't arrogance or bravado. It was the quiet certainty of predators discussing their hunting strategies. There's one more thing you should know, Dr. Warren added, consulting her data pad. Our analysis suggests that the Hive assault on Nexus Station will begin in approximately 36 hours. They're already moving fleet elements into position. 36 hours, Zethkar stood abruptly. Our intelligence indicated we had at least another full rotation cycle before they could mount an attack. Your intelligence was based on their previous movement patterns, Admiral Chen replied calmly. But they're changing tactics. They know you expect a slow buildup, so they're committing to a rapid strike instead. Zethkar activated his emergency communicator, rapidly relaying the information to Admiral Varix and the Defensive Command Center. Within minutes, Alarms were sounding throughout the station as military units began emergency preparations. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Admiral Chen said, standing as well. "Colonel, signal the fleet. Begin Phase 1 preparations." "Already on it," Rodriguez replied, speaking rapidly into his own communicator. "All units report ready for immediate deployment." "Phase 1, Zethkar asked. Dr. Warren smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "We're going to give the Hive a demonstration of what happens when you threaten human allies." As if summoned by her words, the lights in the conference room dimmed briefly as massive energy signatures appeared on the station's sensors. Through the viewport, Zethkar could see the human ships beginning to move, their formation expanding as they prepared for combat. "Commander," Admiral Chen said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "I suggest you monitor the engagement from the station's command center. What you're about to see will probably challenge some of your assumptions about warfare." As the humans filed out of the conference room, Zethkar found himself alone with a growing sense of unease. He had expected these newcomers to be eager but inexperienced allies, requiring guidance and support to be effective against the Hive threat. Instead, he was beginning to suspect that he was about to witness something far more disturbing. The humans weren't just confident about fighting the Hive, they were looking forward to it. And somehow, that terrified him more than the approaching alien swarms ever had. The command center of Nexus Station thrummed with barely controlled chaos as officers from a dozen species coordinated the desperate defense preparations. Zethkar stood before the main tactical display, watching as red markers indicating Hive bioships materialized at the edge of sensor range. The enemy fleet was massive, easily 3 times larger than anything the Alliance had previously encountered. Estimated enemy strength now at 473 confirmed vessels, reported Lieutenant Vexara from the sensor station. Additional contacts appearing every few minutes, total fleet composition unknown. Admiral Verix moved between the command stations like a predator stalking through tall grass, her scaled features set in grim determination. "All defensive platforms are online and ready. Fleet elements are moving into position around the station perimeter. Estimated time until contact. At current approach velocity, 18 hours until they reach engagement range," came the reply from the navigation officer. Zethkar frowned as he studied the tactical display. Something about the Hive approach patterns seemed different from their usual methodical advance. The bioships were moving in tight formation groups rather than the typical swarm configuration, and their velocity was significantly higher than normal operational parameters. "Commander," Admiral Verix called, approaching his position. "Where are your human allies? I was led to believe they would be participating in the defense." "They departed the station approximately 1 hour ago," Zethkar replied, checking his chronometer. "Admiral Chen indicated they would begin something called Phase 1 preparations." "And what exactly does Phase 1 entail?" Before Zethkar could respond, the main display flickered and changed to show a different view of local space. The human fleet had spread into a formation that seemed to make no tactical sense, with individual ships positioned at seemingly random points throughout the system. "Sir," called out the communications officer, her voice tinged with confusion, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting that we clear all Alliance vessels from grid sectors 7 through 12. Admiral Verix turned to stare at the display. "Those sectors encompass nearly a quarter of our defensive perimeter. What possible reason could they have for such a request?" "They're saying it's for our own safety," the communications officer replied, equally puzzled. Quote, "Please maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers from designated sectors. Human forces are about to engage in suppression fire protocols." "Suppression fire?" Admiral Verix repeated. "Against what targets? The Hive fleet is still 17 hours away from those coordinates." Zethkar activated his communicator, directly contacting the human flagship. "Admiral Chen, this is Commander Zethkar. We need clarification on your current tactical deployment." "Commander," came the crisp reply, "we're about to demonstrate why the Hive's decision to accelerate their assault timeline was a critical error. I recommend you watch Grid Sector 9. Show begins in approximately 3 minutes." "Admiral Chen, the Hive fleet is nowhere near Sector 9. What exactly are you planning to engage?" "Who said anything about engaging the main fleet?" Chen out. The communication channel went dead, leaving Zethkar staring at the tactical display with growing apprehension. The human ships had gone completely dark, their signatures vanishing from sensors as if they had simply ceased to exist. "Where did they go?" Admiral Varix demanded, studying the empty space where the human fleet had been moments before. "Unknown, sir," replied the sensor operator, frantically adjusting his equipment. "All 12 vessels have disappeared completely. No energy signatures, no mass readings, nothing." "That's impossible. Ships that size can't just vanish." As if in response to her statement, space itself seemed to tear open in Sector 9. A massive rift of distorted reality appeared, crackling with energies that made the station's sensors scream warnings about impossible readings. From within this tier in spacetime, something emerged that made Zethkar's blood freeze in his veins. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a construct of metal and energy that stretched for kilometers, its surface covered in weapons systems that defied every understanding of physics he possessed. As it fully materialized in normal space, sensor readings showed it was generating power outputs equivalent to a small star. "What in the void is that thing?" Admiral Varix whispered. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice barely steady, "we're receiving a transmission from that construct. It's identifying itself as UES Ragnarok, a human siege platform." The display shifted to show a view from the siege platform's perspective, looking out across the vast emptiness between Nexus Station and the approaching Hive fleet. The platform's weapon systems were already charging, energy readings climbing to levels that made the station's defensive systems look like primitive projectile weapons. "All Alliance vessels," came Admiral Chen's voice over the communication channels, "please observe minimum safe distance protocols. We are about to demonstrate long-range interdiction capabilities." "Long-range?" Admiral Varix repeated incredulously. "The Hive fleet is still 16 hours away from effective weapons range." "Commencing firing sequence," announced a new voice from the human platform. "Primary target, Hive fleet command vessel. Distance, 412 million kilometers. Gravitational compensation calculated. Temporal displacement accounted for. Firing." The siege platform's primary weapon activated with a sound that somehow transmitted through the vacuum of space itself. A beam of pure energy, so intense it appeared solid, lanced across the impossible distance between the platform and the Hive fleet. The tactical display tracked its progress as it crossed the system in mere seconds. The result was visible even at interplanetary distances. A brilliant flash of light appeared at the Hive fleet's location, followed by rapidly expanding debris clouds. When the sensors recalibrated, one of the largest bioships in the enemy formation had simply ceased to exist. "Confirmed direct hit on primary target," reported the siege platform. "Target destroyed. Secondary explosions detected, adjusting targeting parameters for follow-up strikes." The command center had fallen completely silent. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The humans had somehow delivered a precision weapons strike across a distance that should have made accurate targeting impossible, destroying a Hive command vessel that was protected by multiple layers of biological armor and energy shields. "How?" Admiral Varix asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Unknown, sir," came the shaky reply from the sensor station. "The weapon appears to have utilized some form of space-time manipulation to reduce the effective distance between firing point and target. Energy output readings are still climbing off the scale." "Sir," called out another operator, "the Hive fleet is changing course. There. They're accelerating directly toward our position." Zethkar studied the updated tactical display with growing dread. The destruction of their command vessel had triggered exactly the response Admiral Chen had predicted. Instead of maintaining their methodical approach, the Hive fleet was now burning toward Nexus Station at maximum velocity, abandoning all tactical considerations in favor of reaching their target as quickly as possible. "Estimated time to contact now at 6 hours and decreasing," reported navigation. "They're pushing their bioships beyond normal operational limits." "Sir," the communications officer announced, "Admiral Chen is requesting permission to begin Phase 2 operations." "What does Phase 2 involve?" Admiral Varix asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "She's requesting that we evacuate all non-essential personnel from the station and prepare for close quarters engagement protocols. Close quarters engagement against a fleet of nearly 500 hive vessels. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the speakers. Admiral Varix, the enemy has taken the bait. They're now committed to a direct assault on your position, which means they're coming to us instead of forcing us to chase them across multiple systems. This is exactly what we wanted. Admiral Chen, Varix replied, struggling to maintain her composure, you've just provoked an overwhelmingly superior enemy force into a direct attack on the most critical strategic position in Alliance space. How exactly is this a positive development? Because now they're fighting on our terms instead of theirs. Please observe Sector 12. The display shifted again, showing another section of space that had appeared empty moments before. Suddenly, it was filled with human ships that seemed to materialize from nothing. But these weren't the same vessels that had originally arrived at the station. These were smaller, sleeker craft that moved with predatory grace through space. Strike Squadron Alpha is in position, came a new voice over the communications. Target acquisition complete, awaiting authorization for hunter-killer operations. How many ships do you have out there? Admiral Varix demanded. Enough, Admiral Chen replied simply. Squadron leaders, you are authorized to begin harassment protocols. Remember, we want them angry, not dead. Not yet. What followed was unlike any space combat Zethkar had ever witnessed. The human strike craft didn't engage the Hive fleet in conventional battle. Instead, they appeared from nowhere, delivered devastating attacks on individual bioships, and vanished before return fire could be targeted. They moved through space like ghosts, striking at will and disappearing into what seemed to be empty vacuum. How are they doing that? Admiral Varix asked, watching as another Hive vessel exploded under concentrated human firepower. Our sensors show those attack runs are coming from completely empty space. Dr. Warren's voice joined the communications. Admiral, human military doctrine has always emphasized the importance of controlling the battlefield. We don't just fight in space, we shape space to fight the way we want it to. What does that mean? It means we've been preparing this system for combat long before we arrived at your station. Every piece of debris, every asteroid, every gas cloud has been seeded with cloaking devices, weapons platforms, and sensor networks. The Hive fleet isn't just fighting our ships, they're fighting the system itself. As if to demonstrate her point, several asteroids in the Hive fleet's path suddenly revealed themselves to be camouflaged weapons platforms. They opened fire with coordinated precision, creating a crossfire that shredded 3 more bioships before again disappearing into apparently empty space. The entire system is a trap, Zethkar realized with growing horror. Not a trap, Colonel Rodriguez's voice corrected. A hunting ground. We've turned this entire star system into a weapon designed specifically to kill Hive organisms. The tactical display now showed the true scope of human preparations. Hidden weapons platforms were revealing themselves throughout the system, creating a 3-dimensional maze of crossfire zones and kill boxes. The Hive fleet, in their rage-driven charge toward Nexus Station, was flying directly into a carefully orchestrated slaughter. Sir, reported the sensor operator, Hive fleet composition is down to 408 vessels. Human forces are maintaining attack runs without any apparent losses. How is that possible? Admiral Varix asked. Even with superior positioning, they should be taking casualties. Unknown, sir. Human vessels appear to be absorbing direct hits from Hive bioweapons with minimal damage. Their defensive systems are unlike anything in our databases. Admiral Chen's voice returned to the speakers. Admiral Varix, we're about to commence Phase 3 operations. I strongly recommend you move all Alliance vessels to minimum safe distance from the station. Phase 3, Varix repeated with obvious dread. What exactly does Phase 3 entail? Direct engagement, came the simple reply. The Hive fleet will reach effective range of the station in approximately 2 hours. We're going to meet them. Admiral Chen, even with your impressive capabilities, engaging nearly 400 Hive vessels in direct combat seems inadvisable. Who said anything about engaging 400 vessels? By the time we begin direct combat, there won't be nearly that many left. As if summoned by her words, the space around the Hive fleet erupted in a series of explosions that seemed to chain react through their formations. Hidden mines and torpedo spreads that had been lying dormant activated simultaneously, creating a wall of destruction that the bioships flew directly into. Hive fleet strength now at 342 vessels, reported sensors. They're beginning to spread their formation to avoid further concentrated losses. And that, Colonel Rodriguez announced with satisfaction, is exactly what we wanted them to do. The tactical display shifted to show the Hive fleet's new dispersed formation. Instead of the tight, mutually supporting groups they had maintained during their approach, the bioships were now spread across a much wider area of space. They had traded defensive coordination for reduced vulnerability to area effect weapons. All strike squadrons, Admiral Chen commanded, initiate divide and conquer protocols. Individual hunting is now authorized. What happened next defied every principle of space combat that Zethkar had ever learned. The human ships abandoned formation entirely, each vessel beginning independent attacks on isolated Hive bioships. Instead of the careful coordination and mutual support that characterized alliance tactics, the humans fought like a pack of predators, each hunter seeking its own prey. And it was devastatingly effective. Individual human ships proved capable of engaging multiple Hive vessels simultaneously, their weapons and defensive systems operating at efficiency levels that seemed impossible. They moved through the enemy formation like creatures born for violence, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. "Sir," called out the communications officer, "we're receiving damage reports from the Hive fleet. They're requesting surrender terms." Admiral Varric stared at him in disbelief. The Hive doesn't surrender. They don't even have concepts for surrender in their biological programming. "Unknown, sir. The transmission appears to be coming from multiple bioships simultaneously. They're asking the humans to stop." Admiral Chen's laughter echoed through the command center, and Zethkar felt his skin crawl at the sound. It wasn't the laughter of someone enjoying a victory. It was the laughter of a predator playing with wounded prey. "Tell them," Admiral Chen replied, "that surrender was an option before they decided to threaten human allies. Now it's too late for half measures." "Admiral Chen," Admiral Varric interjected, "if the enemy is requesting surrender, perhaps we should consider accepting it." "With respect, Admiral Varric, you don't understand what we're dealing with. The Hive doesn't actually want a surrender. They want time to adapt to our weapons and tactics. If we give them that time, the next encounter will be significantly more difficult." Colonel Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation. "The Hive learns from every engagement. Every ship that escapes carries tactical data back to the collective. If we want to maintain our advantages, we need to ensure no data gets transmitted back to their main fleets." "You're talking about complete annihilation," Zethkar said, finally finding his voice. "We're talking about survival," Dr. Warren replied grimly. "The Hive has consumed dozens of civilizations. They don't take prisoners, they don't accept coexistence, and they don't negotiate. They consume everything they encounter and move on to the next target. The only way to deal with them is to ensure they never get the chance to learn from their failures." The tactical display now showed Hive fleet strength at fewer than 200 vessels, with the numbers continuing to drop as human hunters methodically eliminated isolated bioships. The enemy formation had completely collapsed, individual vessels fleeing in all directions as they finally understood the scope of the trap they had entered. "All human vessels," Admiral Chen announced, "initiate cleanup protocols, no survivors, no exceptions." What followed was less a battle than an extermination. The remaining Hive bioships, scattered and demoralized, were hunted down with methodical efficiency. Human ships appeared from concealment to deliver killing blows, then vanished again into the darkness of space. Within 2 hours, the tactical display showed no remaining enemy contacts. "Confirmed," reported the sensor station. "All Hive vessels destroyed, no escape pods detected, no transmission bursts recorded. Total enemy casualties, 473 vessels. Human casualties, 0. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. A human force of 12 ships had just completely annihilated a Hive fleet that outweighed them by nearly 40-1. They had done so without suffering a single loss, and they had prevented any tactical intelligence from escaping back to the main Hive collective. Admiral Chen's voice returned to the speakers, now carrying a note of satisfaction. "Phase 3 operations complete. Beginning system cleanup and debris analysis. Admiral Varric's Nexus station is secure." "Admiral Chen," Varric replied slowly, What you've just accomplished seems impossible. How did you achieve such a decisive victory? We didn't fight them as equals, Admiral Chen replied. We fought them as what we are apex predators dealing with a species that had never encountered anything more dangerous than themselves. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, watching as human ships emerged from hiding throughout the system to begin collecting debris and analyzing the remains of destroyed bioships. The efficiency of their cleanup operation was almost as disturbing as their combat effectiveness had been. Commander, Admiral Chen added, I believe your alliance needs to have a serious conversation about how you want to proceed with this war. What we've shown you today is just a small demonstration of human military capabilities. If you're serious about ending the Hive threat permanently, we're prepared to do whatever is necessary. As the communication channel closed, Zethkar found himself staring at Admiral Varix, both of them trying to process what they had just witnessed. The humans hadn't just defeated the Hive fleet, they had made it look effortless. They had turned one of the most feared threats in known space into prey animals being hunted for sport. And somehow, that realization was more terrifying than the Hive had ever been. 3 days after the destruction of the Hive fleet, Zethkar found himself aboard the human flagship Indomitable, participating in what Admiral Chen had termed a strategic planning session. The ship's interior was as utilitarian as its exterior, with corridors lined in brushed metal and lighting that seemed designed for function rather than comfort. Yet despite its Spartan appearance, Zethkar couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through the digestive system of some vast predator. The conference room was surprisingly small, containing only a simple table surrounded by chairs that could accommodate various alien physiologies. Admiral Chen sat at the head of the table, flanked by Colonel Rodriguez and Dr. Warren. Across from them sat Admiral Varix and several other Alliance command officers, all of whom wore expressions of barely concealed unease. The debris analysis has provided us with significant intelligence about Hive fleet composition and tactical doctrine, Dr. Warren began, activating a holographic display that showed detailed breakdowns of destroyed bioships. What we've discovered is both encouraging and deeply disturbing. Encouraging how? Asked Admiral Varix, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. The Hive fleet that attacked Nexus Station represented approximately 15% of their total known forces, Dr. Warren replied. This means their overall strategic situation is more precarious than our previous estimates suggested. They committed a significant portion of their mobile assets to what should have been a routine conquest. Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward, his scarred features grim. The disturbing part is why they were willing to take such a risk. Our intelligence indicates they're not just expanding for resources anymore. They're running from something. Running from what? Zethkar asked, though something in his gut already suspected he didn't want to know. Us, Admiral Chen replied simply. Analysis of their biological components shows recent genetic modifications designed specifically to counter human weapon signatures. They've been adapting to fight us, which means they've encountered human forces before and lived to tell about it. The holographic display shifted to show star charts with multiple red zones marking suspected Hive territories. Zethkar studied the patterns with growing dread, noting how the expansion routes seemed to curve around certain sectors of space in seemingly irrational patterns. They're avoiding human-controlled space, he realized with shock. The entire Hive expansion into Alliance territory is an attempt to bypass your defenses. Correct, Dr. Warren confirmed. For the past 18 months, human forces have been conducting what we term aggressive reconnaissance in Hive-occupied systems. We've been studying their capabilities, testing their defenses, and occasionally eliminating high-value targets. Occasionally eliminating, Admiral Varix repeated. You mean you've been at war with them for over a year and never informed the Alliance? Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral, but Zethkar noticed her hands fold together in what appeared to be a deliberate gesture of self-control. Admiral Varix, humanity learned long ago that it's unwise to announce your intentions to potential enemies. We needed to understand what we were dealing with before committing to any formal military action. And what did you discover? Colonel Rodriguez smiled, and once again Zethkar felt that disturbing chill at the predatory satisfaction in the expression. We discovered that the Hive, for all their adaptive capabilities and overwhelming numbers, have one critical weakness. Which is? They're not actually apex predators, Dr. Warren explained, calling up new data displays. They're very successful parasites, but they've never encountered a species that actively hunts them back. Their entire biological and tactical evolution is based on overwhelming lesser species through superior numbers and adaptation. They have no experience dealing with opponents who are fundamentally more dangerous than they are. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the debris field that was still being cleared by human salvage vessels. Admiral Varix, how many hive vessels has the Alliance destroyed in direct combat over the past 5 years? Approximately 800, Varix replied after consulting her data pad. And how many Alliance vessels were lost achieving those victories? Nearly 12,000, Varix admitted reluctantly. In the past 18 months, Admiral Chen said quietly, human forces have destroyed over 3,000 hive vessels. Our losses total 14 ships. The silence that followed this statement was profound. Zethkar found himself staring at the humans with a mixture of awe and growing horror. The casualty ratios they were describing didn't just indicate superior technology, they suggested a fundamental difference in the nature of warfare itself. How is that possible? Admiral Varix asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because we don't fight fair, Colonel Rodriguez replied bluntly. The Alliance has been trying to engage the Hive in honorable combat between military forces. We've been exterminating them like the plague they are. Dr. Warren activated another display, showing tactical footage from previous human engagements with Hive forces. Zethkar watched in fascination and growing nausea as human ships appeared to materialize inside Hive formations, delivered devastating attacks, and vanished before return fire could be coordinated. The engagements lasted mere minutes and always ended with complete destruction of Hive forces. Your stealth technology is remarkable, Admiral Varix observed. How did you develop such advanced cloaking capabilities? Who said anything about cloaking? Admiral Chen replied, returning to her seat. We don't hide from the Hive, we hunt them in dimensions they can't perceive. Dimensions they can't perceive, Zethkar repeated, feeling increasingly out of his depth. Dr. Warren smiled, though there was no warmth in the expression. Commander, how many spatial dimensions does your species recognize for purposes of tactical movement? 3, of course, length, width, height. Humans recognize 11 dimensions for tactical purposes. The Hive, being a purely biological species, can only perceive and operate in the standard 3. This gives us significant advantages in terms of approach vectors and escape routes. Zethkar felt his understanding of physics crumbling around him. 11 dimensions? That's impossible. Even theoretical mathematics only suggests the existence of additional spatial dimensions under extremely exotic conditions. Theoretical mathematics, Colonel Rodriguez replied with amusement, is what you use before you figure out how to build the tools to make theory into reality. Admiral Chen activated a new section of the display, showing technical specifications that made Zethkar's head swim. The data suggested technology that could manipulate space-time itself, folding distances and creating shortcuts through reality that bypassed conventional understanding of physics. This is how you achieved those impossible weapon ranges, he realized. You're not firing across normal space at all. Correct, Dr. Warren confirmed. Human weapon systems can engage targets through dimensional shortcuts that reduce effective range to nearly zero regardless of actual physical distance. We can also use the same technology for rapid deployment of forces and instantaneous withdrawal from combat zones. The implications are staggering, Admiral Varix said, studying the technical data. If you can manipulate space-time on this level, why do you need allies at all? You could eliminate the Hive threat single-handedly. Admiral Chen's expression became more serious. Because eliminating the Hive isn't our only concern. Admiral Varix, what do you think will happen to the galactic political balance after the Hive threat is eliminated? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zethkar found himself considering implications he had never thought to examine. The Alliance existed primarily as a defensive coalition against the Hive threat. Once that threat was removed, what would hold the various species together? You're talking about political stability after the war, Admiral Varix said slowly. I'm talking about preventing the next war, Admiral Chen replied. The Alliance represents dozens of species with competing interests and territorial claims. The only thing keeping you from fighting each other is the external threat represented by the hive. Remove that threat without careful planning, and you'll have civil wars breaking out across half the galaxy. Colonel Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying the Alliance officers with calculating eyes. Human history is full of examples of what happens when military coalitions outlive their original purpose. Usually, they either collapse into chaos or the strongest member absorbs all the others. "And you're the strongest member," Zethkar stated, though it wasn't really a question. "By several orders of magnitude," Dr. Warren confirmed matter-of-factly. "Human military capabilities exceed anything currently available to Alliance species by factors that make meaningful comparison difficult." Admiral Varick straightened in her chair, her scaled features hardening. "Are you threatening us, Admiral Chen?" "I'm explaining our concerns," Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Humanity doesn't want to rule a galactic empire. We have no interest in subjugating other species or controlling their territories. But we also can't allow the galaxy to descend into chaos once the hive threat is eliminated." "What are you proposing?" "A partnership," Admiral Chen said, gesturing to the tactical displays surrounding them. "We provide the military capabilities necessary to eliminate the hive threat permanently. You provide the political and cultural framework to maintain stability afterward. Together, we create a galactic civilization that can prosper without the need for constant warfare." "And if we refuse this partnership?" Admiral Varick asked. Colonel Rodriguez answered before Admiral Chen could respond. "Then you continue fighting the hive using your current methods and casualty ratios until your civilizations collapse from attrition. We'll eliminate the hive threat ourselves and deal with the political aftermath as we see fit." The blunt honesty of his statement sent a chill through the conference room. Zethkar realized that he was witnessing not just a military alliance negotiation, but a fundamental redefinition of galactic power structures. The humans weren't asking for partnership. They were offering it as an alternative to obsolescence. "There is another consideration," Dr. Warren added, calling up new displays that showed long-range sensor data. "The hive isn't the only threat moving through this region of space. Our deep-range reconnaissance has identified at least 3 other aggressive species that are currently expanding into nearby sectors." The star charts showed multiple threat vectors converging on Alliance space from different directions. Each represented a potential enemy force that could prove as dangerous as the hive, and all of them were moving toward territories that would soon be left defenseless if the Alliance collapsed. "Without a stable galactic government," Admiral Chen explained, "each of these threats will be able to pick off isolated systems and individual species. The Alliance gives us a framework for coordinated defense that benefits everyone involved." Admiral Varick studied the threat analysis with obvious concern. "How long before these other species reach Alliance territory?" "Between 18 months and 3 years, depending on their expansion rates," Dr. Warren replied, "which gives us a very limited window to eliminate the hive threat and establish stable political structures before the next crisis begins." "You've been planning this for some time," Zethkar observed. "This isn't a spontaneous offer of alliance. You've been studying our political situation as carefully as you studied hive military capabilities." Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. "Very perceptive, Commander. Yes, humanity has been monitoring galactic political developments for several years. We learned long ago that military victory is meaningless without political stability to follow it." "How did you learn that?" Admiral Varick asked. Colonel Rodriguez's expression darkened, and for a moment, Zethkar glimpsed something in the human's eyes that made him deeply grateful these beings had chosen to be allies rather than enemies. "Because we've made those mistakes before," Rodriguez said quietly. "Human history is full of examples of what happens when you win wars but lose the peace. We've learned to think about the day after victory as carefully as we plan for battle itself." Dr. Warren activated another display, showing what appeared to be historical data from human civilization. The images and data streams depicted massive conflicts, planet-wide devastation, and casualty figures that made even the hive wars seem small by comparison. "Humans have been at war with ourselves for most of our recorded history," Dr. Warren explained. "We've perfected the art of destruction to a degree that most species would find incomprehensible. But we've also learned the importance of building something better after the fighting stops." "What you're seeing," Admiral Chen added, is why humanity developed the military capabilities we possess today. We built weapons capable of destroying entire civilizations because we needed to ensure we could defend against anything that might threaten the peace we've worked so hard to create. Admiral Varix leaned forward, her expression intense. Admiral Chen, I need to ask you directly. If the Alliance accepts your partnership proposal, what guarantees do we have that humanity won't simply eliminate us once we're no longer useful? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zethkar found himself holding his breath, waiting for Admiral Chen's response. The human woman was silent for a long moment, her eyes studying each of the Alliance officers in turn. None, she said finally. You have no guarantees except our word and our actions. But I would ask you to consider this. If humanity wanted to eliminate your civilizations, would we need to offer partnership first? Would we have bothered to demonstrate our capabilities rather than simply acting on them? The uncomfortable truth of her statement was obvious to everyone in the room. The humans had just demonstrated that they could annihilate any opposition with trivial effort. If conquest had been their goal, they wouldn't have needed elaborate negotiations or political frameworks. You could have taken whatever you wanted, Admiral Varix realized. You still could. Yes, Admiral Chen agreed. And that's precisely why we're offering partnership instead. Conquest is easy. Building something worth conquering is much more difficult. Zethkar found himself studying the humans with new understanding. Their casual confidence wasn't arrogance or callousness. It was the certainty of beings who possessed absolute power and had chosen to restrain themselves. They were offering alliance not because they needed help, but because they believed in the value of what could be built together. There's one more thing you should know, Dr. Warren said, calling up a final set of displays. The partnership we're proposing won't just benefit current alliance members. We've identified several dozen species in nearby sectors that could contribute to a stable galactic civilization. Some of them are currently fighting their own losing battles against various threats. The star charts showed potential alliance members scattered across multiple sectors, each facing extinction-level threats that could be easily eliminated with human intervention. The scope of what was being proposed suddenly became clear to Zethkar. You're not talking about an alliance, he said with dawning realization. You're talking about creating a galactic civilization. We're talking about creating a galaxy worth living in, Admiral Chen corrected. One where species can develop and prosper without constantly fearing for their survival. One where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. And humanity would serve as the protector for this galactic civilization, Admiral Varix asked. Humanity would serve as the sword, Colonel Rodriguez replied. You would serve as everything else. Government, culture, trade, exploration, scientific advancement, all the things that make civilization worthwhile. Admiral Chen stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Admiral Varix, we need your decision within 72 hours. The Hive is already moving to counter their losses here, and we need to begin offensive operations before they can fully adapt to our capabilities. Offensive operations? Zethkar asked. We're going to eliminate them, Admiral Chen replied simply. All of them, every Hive world, every bioship, every spawning ground. We're going to make sure this threat never emerges again. As the Alliance officers filed out of the conference room, Zethkar found himself walking beside Admiral Varix through the corridors of the human ship. Neither spoke until they reached the docking bay where their shuttle waited. What are you thinking? Varix asked quietly. Zethkar paused at the shuttle's airlock, looking back at the human vessel that had somehow become the center of galactic politics. I'm thinking that we just met the new apex predator species in this galaxy, and I'm grateful they're offering to be our friends rather than our masters. Do you think they're sincere about the partnership? I think, Zethkar replied slowly, that they're sincere about creating something worth protecting, and I think we'd be fools to refuse the chance to be part of it. As their shuttle departed the human flagship, Zethkar watched through the viewport as more human vessels materialized from what had seemed to be empty space. The fleet was much larger than they had originally indicated, and its presence suggested that humanity had been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone had realized. Within 72 hours, the Alliance would have to decide whether to trust these dangerous newcomers with their future. But as Zethkar considered the alternatives, he realized there might not actually be a choice at all. The humans had already demonstrated that they could take whatever they wanted. The fact that they were asking permission suggested that they still believed in the value of consent. That might be the most hopeful sign of all. The Alliance Council chamber aboard Nexus Station had never felt smaller than it did during the emergency session called to vote on humanity's partnership proposal. Representatives from 47 different species filled the curved tiers of seats, their various forms creating a chaotic symphony of colors, shapes, and sizes. Yet despite the diversity of life represented in the chamber, Zethkar noticed that every single delegate wore the same expression of barely controlled anxiety. High Chancellor Mordek of the Centauri Confederation rose from the central speaker's platform, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns that normally would have been beautiful. Today, they seemed somehow ominous. "Honored delegates," Mordek began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones characteristic of his species, "we have gathered to make perhaps the most significant decision in the history of our alliance. The human proposal before us represents not merely a military partnership, but a fundamental transformation of galactic political structures." Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Zethkar, seated in the observer section alongside Admiral Varix and other military advisors, watched as species representatives engaged in rapid, whispered consultations with their staff members. The tension was palpable. "Before we begin formal debate," Mordek continued, "I believe it would be beneficial to review the intelligence gathered from our recent demonstration of human military capabilities." The chamber's central display activated, showing tactical analyses of the Hive fleet engagement. Even 3 days later, the casualty figures seemed impossible to believe. 473 enemy vessels destroyed with 0 Alliance losses, weapons ranges that exceeded anything in known technology databases, combat effectiveness that bordered on the supernatural. Delegate Thylex of the Qualeri Republic was the first to speak. "High Chancellor, while the military capabilities demonstrated by our human contacts are undeniably impressive, I submit that this very effectiveness should give us pause. Are we prepared to ally ourselves with a species whose power so completely dwarfs our own?" "And what alternative do you propose?" asked Ambassador Kethrin of the Outer Rim territories. "Continue our current casualty rates against the Hive until our civilizations collapse. The humans have demonstrated both the capability and willingness to eliminate this threat. Should we reject such assistance out of pride?" Delegate Vosmer of the Silicon Hegemony rose, his metallic form catching the light as he gestured toward the tactical displays. "The question is not whether we should accept human military assistance. The question is whether we can afford to become dependent upon it. What happens to Alliance autonomy when our very survival rests upon the goodwill of a single species?" Zethkar found himself rising from his seat, surprising himself with the impulse to speak. "Honored delegates, if I may offer a military perspective on these concerns." High Chancellor Mordek nodded his consent. "The chamber recognizes Commander Zethkar of the Valorian fleet." "Thank you, High Chancellor." Zethkar moved to the speaker's platform, acutely aware of dozens of alien eyes focused upon him. "I have had more direct contact with human forces than any other Alliance representative. I have observed their capabilities, their tactics, and their decision-making processes. And I must tell you that our debates about dependence and autonomy are fundamentally irrelevant." The chamber erupted in startled exclamations. Several delegates rose to voice objections, but Mordek gestured for silence. "Explain your statement, Commander." Zethkar took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "Honored delegates, we are debating whether to accept partnership with humans as if we have a meaningful choice in the matter. We do not. The humans have already demonstrated that they can eliminate any opposition with trivial effort. They could take whatever they wanted from us without bothering to ask permission." "Are you suggesting we surrender to them?" demanded Delegate Thylex. "I'm suggesting we recognize reality," Zethkar replied firmly. "The humans are not offering partnership because they need our help. They're offering it because they believe cooperation produces better results than conquest. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is a powerful species choosing to share power rather than simply taking what they want." Ambassador Kethrin leaned forward in her seat. "Commander, what is your assessment of human intentions? Do you believe their stated goals are genuine?" Zethkar paused, remembering his conversations with Admiral Chen and her staff. "Ambassador, I believe the humans are genuinely committed to creating a stable galactic civilization. But I also believe they will create that civilization with or without our cooperation. The choice we face is whether to be partners in building something new or obstacles to be removed. The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. These were not comfortable thoughts for species accustomed to seeing themselves as significant players in galactic politics. High Chancellor Mordak broke the silence. Commander, you spoke of observing human decision-making processes. Can you elaborate on how they reach strategic conclusions? Zethkar nodded, grateful for the opportunity to address what he considered the most important aspect of the human character. Human strategic thinking appears to be based on long-term planning that extends far beyond immediate tactical concerns. They don't just plan to win battles, they plan to win wars, secure the peace afterward, and prevent future conflicts from arising. And how do they accomplish this extended planning? By accepting that some decisions require terrible costs, Zethkar replied quietly. Humans appear willing to take actions that other species would consider unthinkably brutal if those actions serve longer-term goals of stability and peace. Delegate Vosmer's metallic features shifted in what might have been concern. You speak of brutality. Are you suggesting that humans are inherently violent? I'm suggesting that humans are inherently practical, Zethkar corrected. They understand that sometimes violent action is necessary to prevent greater violence later. They're not cruel for the sake of cruelty, but they're absolutely ruthless when they believe it serves a greater purpose. The chamber's display shifted to show new intelligence data that had been gathered from the hive engagement. Dr. Warren's voice echoed through the speakers as she provided analysis of the destroyed bioships. Delegates of the Alliance, came the human scientist's measured tones. Your debates about human intentions and capabilities are noted and understood. However, there are developments you should be aware of before making your final decision. All eyes turned toward the display as it showed long-range sensor data from the edges of Alliance space. New contacts were appearing, massive formations moving at velocities that suggested coordinated military action. 3 additional hive fleets are currently en route toward Alliance territory, Dr. Warren continued. Total estimated strength exceeds 1,500 vessels. Their trajectory suggests they intend to launch coordinated strikes against 12 core worlds simultaneously. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions. 1,500 vessels represented the largest single hive force ever detected, far beyond anything the Alliance could hope to counter with conventional forces. Furthermore, Dr. Warren added, our analysis suggests these fleets include vessel types we have not previously encountered. The hive appears to have been developing new biological technologies specifically designed to counter Alliance defensive systems. High Chancellor Mordak struggled to restore order to the chamber as delegates shouted questions and demands for more information. When relative quiet returned, his voice carried a note of barely controlled desperation. Dr. Warren, what is the human assessment of Alliance defensive capabilities against this new threat? Negligible, came the blunt reply. Alliance forces would be overwhelmed within hours of initial contact. Even with perfect coordination and optimal defensive positioning, casualty projections exceed 95% of all military assets. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Zethkar watched as the political reality of their situation finally penetrated the consciousness of every delegate present. The Alliance, for all its proud history and cultural achievements, was facing extinction. Admiral Chen's voice joined the communication channel. Delegates, human forces are prepared to intercept and eliminate these hive fleets. However, such action would require immediate coordination with Alliance command structures and full integration of military planning processes. Are you saying you can stop 1,500 hive vessels? Asked Ambassador Catherine, her voice barely a whisper. We're saying we can eliminate the entire hive threat permanently, Admiral Chen replied. But doing so will require access to Alliance intelligence networks, star charts, and logistical support systems. We need the partnership we've proposed to be formalized immediately. Delegate Thylex rose shakily to his feet. Admiral Chen, if we formalize this partnership, what guarantees do we have that human forces won't simply use our resources to establish their own dominance over Alliance space? None, Admiral Chen replied with characteristic directness. You have no guarantees except our demonstrated behavior and stated intentions. However, I would point out that if we intended to establish dominance over your territories, we would not need your cooperation to do so. High Chancellor Mordak looked around the chamber, nodding the expressions of resignation and reluctant acceptance on most delegates' faces. Admiral Chen, if the Alliance accepts your partnership proposal, what would immediate implementation require? Full access to Alliance military command and control systems. Colonel Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation. Integration of human fleet elements with Alliance defensive positions, and authorization to begin immediate offensive operations against all identified Hive strongholds. Offensive operations? Delegate Vosmer asked. We're not going to wait for them to attack us again, Admiral Chen explained. We're going to eliminate every Hive presence in known space, every world they've consumed, every breeding facility, every bioship production center. We're going to ensure this threat never resurges. Dr. Warren's voice added clinical detail to the proposal. Human strategic analysis indicates that partial elimination of the Hive threat is ineffective. Their reproductive and adaptive capabilities mean that any surviving populations will eventually reconstitute the threat at previous levels. Complete eradication is the only viable long-term solution. Zethkar found himself speaking again, though he hadn't consciously decided to do so. Honored delegates, we are facing the choice between partnership with humans or extinction at the hands of the Hive. I submit that this is not actually a choice at all. Ambassador Kethrin nodded slowly. Commander Zethkar speaks truth. The question is not whether we should accept human partnership. The question is whether we should do so as willing allies or conquered subjects. There is another consideration, High Chancellor Mordak said gravely. If we accept this partnership and humans eliminate the Hive threat as promised, what role do Alliance species play in the galaxy that results? Admiral Chen's response carried a note of what might have been genuine warmth. You play the role of civilization builders. Humans excel at warfare and destruction. Alliance species excel at culture, science, exploration, and all the things that make life worth protecting. Together we can create something neither could achieve alone. And if we refuse? Asked Delegate Thylex, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then we eliminate the Hive threat ourselves and deal with the resulting political situation as we see fit, Colonel Rodriguez replied bluntly. The Hive will be removed regardless. The question is whether you want to help shape what comes after. High Chancellor Mordak called for order as delegates began urgent discussions with their staff members. The political calculations were obvious to everyone present. Acceptance meant subordination to human military superiority. Refusal meant potential annihilation by either the Hive or eventual human action. Honored delegates, Mordak announced, I believe we have sufficient information to proceed to a formal vote. The motion before us is acceptance of the human partnership proposal with full military integration as outlined. All those in favor. Hands, tentacles, and various appendages rose throughout the chamber. Zethkar counted silently, nodding that nearly 70% of the delegates were voting in favor. All those opposed. A smaller number of appendages rose, representing perhaps 20% of the delegates. Abstentions. The remaining 10% chose not to vote, their indecision itself a form of political statement. The motion passes, High Chancellor Mordak announced. The Alliance accepts the human partnership proposal with immediate implementation of military integration protocols. Admiral Chen's voice returned to the speakers, now carrying obvious satisfaction. High Chancellor, human forces will begin coordination with Alliance command structures within the hour. We estimate 6 days to achieve full integration and begin offensive operations. 6 days, Delegate Vosmer repeated incredulously. You can prepare for a galaxy-wide campaign against the Hive in 6 days. No, Dr. Warren replied, and Zethkar detected what might have been amusement in her voice. We've been prepared for a galaxy-wide campaign against the Hive for the past 14 months. 6 days is how long we need to integrate Alliance assets into our existing operational framework. The implications of that statement sent another chill through the chamber. The humans hadn't just been planning to help the Alliance defend against the Hive. They had been planning to eliminate the Hive entirely, with or without Alliance participation. Admiral Chen, High Chancellor Mordek said slowly, how long have you been preparing for this partnership proposal? Since approximately 6 hours after we first learned of the Alliance's existence, Admiral Chen replied. Humans don't make contingency plans. We make complete operational frameworks for every scenario we can imagine. Colonel Rodriguez's voice added a final note to the discussion. Delegates, you've made the right choice. When this is over, the galaxy will be a much safer place, and your civilizations will have the opportunity to grow and prosper without constantly fearing for their survival. As the formal session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Zethkar found himself standing alone at the speaker's platform, staring at the tactical displays that still showed incoming hive fleets. In 6 days, those displays would likely show something very different. Admiral Verix approached him, her expression thoughtful. Commander, what have we just agreed to? Zethkar considered the question carefully before answering. We've agreed to survive, Admiral. Everything else is details we'll have to work out as we go. Do you think we made the right choice? I think, Zethkar replied quietly, that we made the only choice that allowed us to continue existing as independent civilizations. The humans could have simply conquered us outright. Instead, they've chosen to make us partners in building something new. And that doesn't concern you. Zethkar looked out through the chamber's viewport at the stars beyond, knowing that somewhere among them, human forces were preparing to reshape the galaxy through violence that would dwarf anything previously imagined. Admiral, he said finally, I've learned that there are worse things than being the junior partner in a relationship with apex predators, being their prey, for instance. As they left the chamber together, neither spoke of the uncomfortable truth that now hung over everything. The Alliance had just voluntarily surrendered its independence to ensure its survival. And somehow, that felt like the most hopeful outcome they could have reasonably expected. 6 months after the Alliance formally accepted humanity's partnership proposal, Zethkar stood aboard the observation deck of the newly constructed station New Horizons, watching as the last hive world burned. The planet below had once hosted billions of the chittering bioforms that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. Now it was a sterile rock, its surface scoured clean by weapons that had rewritten the fundamental laws of matter itself. Final sterilization protocols complete, reported Dr. Warren from the command center. All biological signatures eliminated. Atmospheric composition returned to pre-infestation baseline. The world is ready for eventual recolonization. Admiral Chen stood beside Zethkar at the viewport, her expression unreadable as she watched the smoke plumes dissipate in the alien atmosphere. That was the last one. Every hive world, every breeding facility, every bioship production center. Total elimination confirmed across 17 star systems. The casual tone in which she announced the complete eradication of a species that had once seemed unstoppable sent familiar chills down Zethkar's spine. Over the past 6 months, he had watched humanity wage war with an efficiency that transcended mere military superiority. They had turned genocide into a precise science, conducted with the same methodical planning that other species applied to infrastructure development. How many? He asked quietly. Estimated total hive population at campaign commencement was approximately 470 billion individual organisms, Dr. Warren replied from her station. All confirmed eliminated, reproductive facilities destroyed, genetic material samples secured for research purposes only. 470 billion lives extinguished in 6 months. The scale was beyond comprehension, even for someone who had witnessed the hive's own atrocities firsthand. Yet Zethkar found himself feeling not horror, but relief. The nightmare that had consumed dozens of civilizations was finally over. Commander, Admiral Chen said, nodding his expression, you look troubled. I'm processing the implications, Zethkar replied honestly. 6 months ago, the hive seemed like an unstoppable force that would eventually consume the entire galaxy. Today, they're extinct. The speed of this transformation is difficult to comprehend. Colonel Rodriguez approached from the tactical station, carrying data pads that undoubtedly contained casualty reports and resource expenditure analyses. Commander, if it helps with your processing, human casualties for the entire campaign totaled 37 personnel. Alliance casualties were 0. 37, Zethkar repeated, staring at the devastated world below. 37 human lives to eliminate a threat that had been destroying civilizations for decades. Acceptable losses for a campaign of this magnitude, Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. Most of those casualties occurred during the initial deep space reconnaissance missions. Once we understood Hive defensive capabilities, actual combat losses were minimal. Admiral Chen activated the station's communication system, broadcasting to the combined Human Alliance fleet positioned throughout the system. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Operation Final Solution is